For weeks, American defense officials insisted they had a complete picture of Iran's military capabilities, every missile site mapped, every drone program cataloged, every proxy network accounted for. That confidence collapsed in a single afternoon over the Gulf, when a weapon system American radar operators had never logged, never wargamed, and never briefed to command suddenly appeared on scopes, moving in a way nothing in Iran's known arsenal was supposed to move. Within minutes, a U.S. Navy destroyer was forced into an emergency defensive posture against a threat the Pentagon's own intelligence assessments said did not exist. You are about to understand what that weapon actually is, how Iran managed to build and hide it for years without detection, and why American military planners are now scrambling to rewrite assumptions about Iranian capability that have stood for over a decade. The moment itself unfolded fast, and almost nobody outside a small circle of defense officials knew it was happening in real time. A U.S. Navy destroyer conducting routine freedom of navigation operations near the Strait of Hormuz picked up an anomalous contact low altitude, high speed, an approach profile that did not match any cataloged Iranian cruise missile, drone, or fast attack craft in the Pentagon's threat library. The ship's defensive systems, built and tuned against known Iranian capabilities, took critical extra seconds to classify the threat because the threat did not match anything they had been programmed to recognize. Those seconds, in modern naval warfare, are the difference between a system that works exactly as designed and a system that gets caught flat-footed. The destroyer's countermeasures activated only after the object had already closed to a distance that, according to officials briefed on the incident, should never have been allowed to happen against a peer-aware defensive network. It missed, but it missed by a margin that has since triggered one of the most urgent capability reviews the U.S. Navy has conducted in years. Now, you need to understand who is actually behind this weapon, because the story Iran wants you to believe and the story emerging from actual battle damage assessment are two very different things. Iranian state media moved almost immediately to claim credit, describing the weapon in vague, boastful terms as proof of the Islamic Republic's growing indigenous military sophistication. But American and allied intelligence services, working from radar tracking data, intercepted communications, and fragments recovered in the aftermath, describe something far more specific and far more concerning. A hypersonic adjacent glide weapon, launched from a mobile platform that Iran had spent years disguising as a civilian transport vehicle, using a guidance architecture that shows unmistakable fingerprints of foreign technical assistance far more advanced than anything Tehran has previously fielded. You will be very surprised when you understand exactly how long Iran has been sitting on this capability while the world assumed its missile program had stalled. Before we go further, you need to meet someone, because this story is not just about steel and guidance systems. His name will not appear in any Pentagon transcript, but he is the reason we understand as much as we do about what actually happened that day. He is a junior weapons systems operator aboard the destroyer, and in a message relayed through family shortly after the incident, before official channels went silent on the details, he described the moment the system flagged an unknown contact as unlike anything he had trained for in years of simulations. "We had drills for everything Iran was supposed to have," he said. "This wasn't in any of them. For about 4 seconds, nobody on that console knew what we were looking at, and 4 seconds is a lifetime when something is coming at you that fast. Keep him in mind. We will come back to him, because what he experienced in that control room is the clearest possible window into how completely the single weapon has upended what the United States believed it knew about Iranian capability. To understand how Iran pulled this off, you have to understand what everyone got wrong about Iran's missile program over the last decade. Western intelligence agencies have spent years tracking Iran's known ballistic and cruise missile families, the Shahab series, the Samar cruise missile, the various Fateh family short-range systems, building a comprehensive picture of what Tehran could credibly threaten and where. That picture, defense officials now admit, was built almost entirely on programs Iran wanted the world to see. What it missed was a parallel development track, reportedly run through a compartmentalized IRGC Aerospace Force unit, operating with minimal ties to Iran's public defense industry, focused specifically on maneuverable boost glide reentry technology designed to defeat exactly the kind of layered naval air defense systems the U.S. Navy relies on throughout the Gulf. Fragments recovered after the incident reportedly show composite materials and thermal protection techniques consistent with technology transfer from a state actor far more advanced in hypersonic research than Iran has ever been credited with, accessing directly. Technology defense analysts believe was quietly funneled through intermediary channels, specifically to avoid the kind of overt cooperation that would trigger immediate sanctions escalation. What makes this weapon genuinely dangerous is not just its speed, though the speed is staggering. Officials briefed on the tracking data describe a terminal approach, velocity multiple times that of Iran's existing anti-ship cruise missile inventory. What makes it dangerous is the flight profile. Rather than a predictable ballistic arc that missile defense radar is specifically tuned to detect and track early, this weapon reportedly maneuvers unpredictably during its glide phase, changing altitude and trajectory in ways that defeat the intercept algorithms built into current generation naval defense systems. This is precisely the category of threat that American and Allied navies have spent the last several years publicly worrying about regarding Russian and Chinese hypersonic development. Almost nobody in the defense establishment seriously considered that Iran, working through deniable technical assistance and years of patient compartmentalized development, might field a working prototype of exactly that capability first in an actual combat environment against an American warship. So now the obvious question, and you need to sit with this one for a moment, does this mean Iran has genuinely closed the technology gap with the world's most advanced militaries? Here is where you need to be extremely careful, because the tempting narrative that Iran has suddenly become a hypersonic power on par with Russia or China is not just wrong, it fundamentally misunderstands what actually happened and why it matters in a completely different way. What Iran has almost certainly built is not a mass-produced field-ready weapon system. Every indicator points instead to a small, closely guarded stockpile of what defense analysts are now calling a demonstration-capable prototype, built specifically to prove a single point at a moment of Tehran's choosing: that Iran retains the ability to inflict a strategically significant, deeply humiliating strike against American naval assets, even after years of sanctions, sabotage, and degraded conventional capability elsewhere in its arsenal. This was not deployed as the opening move of a sustained campaign. It was deployed as a message, a single, carefully timed demonstration meant to be seen, analyzed, and feared, precisely because its rarity makes its future use completely unpredictable. This is the moment where the true cost of this revelation has to be measured. And it is not measured only in the anti-missile countermeasures the Navy nearly failed to deploy in time. It is measured in the sudden, expensive scramble now underway across the entire U.S. defense establishment. Emergency reviews of every Aegis-equipped vessel's defensive software are already being fast-tracked, a process that, under normal circumstances, takes years of testing and certification, but is now being compressed into months under direct pressure from Pentagon leadership. Every Allied Navy operating in the Gulf British, French, and Gulf state partners alike is now demanding updated threat briefings and, in several cases, quietly requesting accelerated access to American countermeasure technology they had previously been told was unnecessary against Iran's known capabilities. Defense contractors specializing in hypersonic defense systems have reportedly seen an immediate surge in emergency procurement requests, the kind of sudden budget reallocation that normally takes a full congressional cycle, now being pushed through in weeks because a single Iranian weapon exposed a gap nobody wanted to admit existed. The financial cost of closing this gap will run into the billions. The strategic cost, the sudden, uncomfortable realization that American naval dominance in the Gulf was never as absolute as it was presented to be, may prove far more expensive in the long run. The human cost sits closer to home than most viewers will expect. Sailors aboard every vessel currently deployed in the Gulf are now operating under a real-time reminder that the threat environment they trained against is no longer the threat environment they're actually facing. Officers who spent years running simulations against known Iranian capabilities are now confronting the psychological reality that an adversary they had, in many cases, come to view as a manageable second-tier threat just demonstrated the ability to strike with a weapon nobody saw coming. That kind of uncertainty does not stay contained to a single incident report. It changes how every subsequent patrol is conducted, how every unknown contact is treated, how much margin for error commanders are willing to accept in a region where a single miscalculation can spiral into open conflict within hours. Now, let's take the Steelman seriously, because the fear this weapon has generated across Washington is not irrational, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. If Iran genuinely possesses even a small stockpile of a maneuverable glide weapon capable of defeating current naval defenses, the strategic calculus around the entire Gulf region changes overnight. Every American carrier strike group operating within range of Iranian coastal batteries suddenly has to account for a threat category it was not built to counter. Every ally that has staked its own regional security posture on the assumption of overwhelming American naval superiority now has to quietly reassess whether that superiority still holds in the specific, narrow window where this weapon could be employed. And perhaps most dangerously, a regime that has just demonstrated it can inflict a genuinely frightening, headline-grabbing strike against a symbol of American power may feel emboldened rather than deterred, particularly if its leadership calculates that the weapon's rarity itself provides a kind of ambiguous deterrence, a threat too significant to ignore but too scarce to definitively counter. But here is where the wall of reality has to come in, because a single demonstrated capability, however alarming, is not the same as a sustained war-winning arsenal, and every indicator suggests Iran knows that better than anyone currently panicking about it. Intelligence assessments briefed to congressional defense committees reportedly describe extremely limited production capacity for this weapon system, constrained by the same sanctions, strangled industrial base that has hampered every other Iranian advanced weapons program for years. Iran does not have the specialized composite manufacturing infrastructure, the guidance-grade microelectronics supply chain, or the testing infrastructure to mass produce a weapon like this without an industrial partnership far more overt than the deniable technical assistance it has relied on so far. And any move toward that kind of overt partnership risks triggering exactly the kind of international response Tehran has spent years trying to avoid. American and allied electronic warfare and missile defense programs, meanwhile, are not standing still. The same compressed timeline emergency review process now underway across the fleet means that whatever advantage this weapon currently holds has an expiration date measured in months, not years, as countermeasure software, updated interceptor algorithms, and adjusted radar signatures begin rolling out across the force. Iran built a weapon that worked once against a system tuned for a threat that did not yet exist in its threat library. It will not work the same way twice. Now watch what happens next, because a single Iranian weapon appearing where nobody expected it does not stay a single country story for long. The first domino is Israel, and it moves almost immediately, because Israeli defense officials have spent years operating under the assumption that Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow together represent a genuinely comprehensive shield against everything in Iran's known arsenal. This incident forces an uncomfortable reassessment. If Iran has demonstrated even a limited maneuverable glide capability against a naval target, Israeli planners now have to seriously wargame whether a land-based variant, potentially fielded through Hezbollah or another proxy, could someday threaten the same kind of unpredictable, hard-to-intercept strike against Israeli territory. Israeli intelligence services are reportedly requesting direct access to the recovered fragment analysis, treating this incident not as an American problem, but as an early warning for their own defensive planning. The second domino is the Gulf states, and their reaction reveals exactly how quickly deterrence calculations shift when a weapon nobody expected suddenly becomes real. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, both of which have invested enormous sums in American and European air defense systems, specifically calibrated against Iran's known missile and drone capabilities, are now demanding updated threat briefings and, according to regional sources, quietly exploring whether their own defensive procurement needs urgent revision. For years, Gulf security planning treated Iran's conventional missile threat as serious but bounded, something layered defenses could reasonably manage. A single weapon that defeats an American destroyer's defenses changes that assumption for every capital in the region simultaneously, and changes it in a direction nobody in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi wanted to confront. The third domino runs straight through Washington's own defense industrial base, where this incident is already reshaping budget priorities in ways that will ripple for years. Congressional defense committees, previously focused overwhelmingly on countering Chinese and Russian hypersonic development, are now confronting the politically awkward reality that Iran, a country whose conventional military has been repeatedly described as degraded and overstretched, managed to field a relevant version of the same threat category first, in an actual operational environment. Emergency funding requests for accelerated countermeasure development are moving through Congress with a speed defense analysts describe as unusual even by wartime standards. And every defense contractor with a hypersonic defense program suddenly finds itself at the center of a bidding war for resources that did not exist a month ago. The fourth domino stretches into the shipping and energy markets, where the mere existence of an unpredictable, hard-to-intercept Iranian weapon capable of threatening naval assets in the Gulf has already triggered a measurable spike in insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Energy analysts note that even a demonstrated but rarely used capability can move markets because insurers and shipping companies price risk based on possibility, not frequency. A weapon that appeared once and defeated American countermeasures is now a permanent line item in every risk assessment for Gulf shipping, regardless of how limited Iran's actual production capacity turns out to be. And then there is the fifth domino, the quiet one, playing out not in a briefing room but in the calculations of the very states suspected of quietly assisting Iran's development in the first place. Every intelligence service now tracking this incident is asking the same question. Which foreign technical partnership made this leap possible? And what does that partner gain from watching American naval defenses get tested in a live incident without their own fingerprints being directly exposed? Analysts point to this as a strategically efficient arrangement for whichever state provided the underlying technology, a real-world combat test of advanced glide weapon performance against genuine American countermeasures, conducted entirely through a deniable proxy, with all the operational lessons flowing back through channels far harder to trace than a direct confrontation would ever allow. While all of this plays out externally, Something quieter, but arguably more significant, is happening inside Iran's own military establishment, where this single successful demonstration has become a powerful internal political tool. For years, factions within the IRGC, pushing for continued investment in advanced asymmetric weapons programs, rather than costly conventional force modernization that sanctions have made nearly impossible anyway, struggled to justify that spending against skeptics who argued Iran's deterrent strategy had stalled. This incident silences those skeptics overnight. Iranian state media, unsurprisingly, is amplifying the moment into a broader narrative of technological triumph against American power, a narrative that conveniently distracts from years of economic hardship and diplomatic isolation. Independent Persian language outlets operating outside Iran report that hardline factions are already using the incident to argue for renewed investment in exactly this category of compartmentalized, deniable weapons development. Potentially, at the expense of the broader conventional and air defense rebuilding programs Iran has struggled to fund since its network of Russian-supplied systems suffered such visible losses in recent months. Let's go back to the beginning, to the young weapons systems operator standing at his console with 4 seconds to understand something his training never prepared him for. In the days since, official Navy channels have released only the barest details of the incident, careful, controlled language about an anomalous contact successfully countered, language that says almost nothing about how close that 4-second gap came to a very different outcome. He does not know, and neither do the analysts poring over the recovered fragments, whether what his ship encountered that day represents the full extent of Iran's capability, or merely the first visible edge of something far larger, still hidden in compartmentalized development, waiting for the moment Tehran decides it is worth revealing again. His story, and the uncertainty sitting behind it, is now shared by every sailor, every commander, and every defense planner across the Gulf who has to operate from this point forward, assuming the threat picture they were given was never complete. For years, the United States operated across the Gulf with a quiet, largely unspoken confidence that its naval technology and its intelligence picture of Iranian capability had put a hard ceiling on what Tehran could realistically threaten. That confidence did not collapse to overwhelming Iranian firepower or a sustained military campaign. It collapsed to a single weapon, built in secret, tested once, and deployed at a moment entirely of Iran's choosing, specifically designed to prove that the ceiling everyone assumed was there had already been quietly broken. Iran's leadership can spend the coming weeks amplifying this moment into whatever story serves its domestic political needs. But every naval commander now reviewing emergency countermeasure updates, every allied intelligence service requesting access to the fragment analysis, and every energy market quietly repricing risk in the Strait of Hormuz already understands the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the headlines. The gap everyone assumed was never as wide as it looked, and the next time something unexpected appears on a destroyer's radar, nobody will have the luxury of 4 seconds of confusion again. Thank you for watching. Please like the video and comment your thoughts, because this story is far from finished, and we will be here to follow every next development as it unfolds.